Welcome back to the Protocol Services Summit by Messari. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Evan Zakhary. I'm currently a protocol research analyst for Messari, and I'm really excited to introduce the topic at hand today, which is discussing the role that foundations play in stewarding network activity and leading the direction on their infrastructure. So, I'm joined here by three experts in DAO governance and infrastructure. And to begin, could each of our panelists, would you mind please sharing your roles, your names, and how you got into the crypto industry, but more specifically, the governance space as well?
Yeah, sure. I can start. My name's Clifton. I work on the governance team over at the Arbitrum Foundation. So I've been in crypto full time for about 5 years and counting now. Started at the DYDX Foundation, working on governance as well, and then moved on to Arbitrum Foundation to work on governance. So prior to that, had a history of product management in some of the largest Web2 companies. And how I got into crypto in the first place was reading the Bitcoin white paper and then subsequently the Ethereum white paper, and just the concept of smart contracts was amazing. I just wanted to find out a little bit more, and then as I dove in, I realized how organizations could change via this DAO structure. So I was keen to get involved in DAO governance, even though it was really, really nascent. So it's just been a lot of experimentation, and I guess I wouldn't call myself an expert, but yeah, in the trenches every day, it's been fun. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
I'm Will. I'm a co-founder of Syndicate. We're a platform for app chains. I'm also a contributor to Nouns. I also was on the core team of Constitution DAO, where we placed a bid on the US Constitution in under a week. That was a very stressful week. And I also, in addition, created Adventure Gold for the Loot ecosystem, which uses on-chain governance. I got into crypto through mesh networking, which is another decentralized technology, in 2013. Did some hacking on Bitcoin, found it hard to use. I saw that Ethereum had smart contracts, so I took $10 that I had from Coinbase as a sign-up bonus, and I put that in the Ethereum presale. If I'd put $100 in, I could have bought a house with it, but you know, hindsight's 2020. And then I got into DAO governance specifically. I invested in the first DAO in 2016. That got hacked, so we didn't really vote on anything. But then worked on a bunch of investment DAOs, including City DAO, helping groups buy land in Wyoming, Constitution DAO, and now guide app chains through how they think about network, foundation, and how those interplay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dylan from the StarkNet Foundation. Is this working? Yeah, I think so. OK, cool. So I think there's a few questions here. How did I get into crypto? I think the real answer for a lot of people here, including myself, is I wanted to make some money. So there was pure speculation. I was a private equity guy before coming into crypto full time, so thought of this as an interesting investment vehicle. And as I kind of explored and got into crypto, I started learning more and more about the community side of it and how communities can actually drive incentives and protocol design. One key thing that kind of really pushed me to the community side and the governance side was actually the Constitution DAO, where I thought it was the most interesting, unique way of, and funky, like fun, like it is objectively a fun thing that it was, to actually bridge the power of a community to potentially beat, I think it was Citadel and Ken Griffin, who actually bought the Constitution there. And that really got me excited about exploring the design patterns of governance and where it's broken and where we can fix it going forward.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that, and especially, cool intersection there between the Constitution DAO and starting off. So that's excellent. Going on to our next question, would each of you mind providing a brief overview of your company or network's governance framework or infrastructure? How are key decisions made, and what role do different stakeholders play in this process?
Start? Okay. To start, Arbitrum is actually one of the largest Ethereum layer 2s around. And Arbitrum DAO started upon token generation event. So that was in March of 2023. So we have a pretty standard governance system where it's one token, one vote, and we have delegation. So we have a forum, and then we have off-chain voting for sentiment analysis, for sentiment and temperature check. stage, and then we have an on-chain governor. So our governance is actually fully on-chain. So anything that is executed, whether it's the Security Council, whether it's treasury fund transfers, whether it's protocol upgrades, everything is on-chain and everything is actually controlled by the DAO. So I'd say we actually have a really, really powerful DAO, and governance there has been really, really fun to deal with. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Cliff.
Yeah, I can attest that Arbitrum governance is top notch. I spend a lot of time in the rollup space, and yeah, you all have a lot that governance can do, which is not the same for all platforms. We help a bunch of app chains think about how to manage their organizations, and in particular, where fees go, what fee levels are set, and also who controls things like sequencing, upgrade keys, and details along those lines for Arbitrum Orbit compatible rollups and other frameworks. And one thing that we tend to see is that a lot of groups that are running rollups right now, what they really want to do is progressive decentralization. If you're a group running a rollups right now are still quite centralized to varying degrees. Some are more centralized than others, but all of these groups want to progressively decentralize over time and give more and more control to the community as the rollup ecosystem gets more and more mature. I'll also give a brief survey of the governance of some of the other initiatives I've been involved in. With Nouns, Nouns was 1 noun per day with 10% going to the founders. And that was a distribution where all of the auctions from the Nouns are governed by holders completely on-chain, which is really cool. Nouns is one of the few DAOs where everything's on-chain and you have no idea what the outcome of a vote will be in advance. You only know after it's posted and after everyone votes, which is not true of all places, but true of Nouns. And then for Constitution DAO, we didn't have any votes. So sometimes we'll get criticism that Constitution DAO wasn't a real DAO. The thing is that before placing the bid for the US Constitution, we had a very clear goal: just place the bid at Sotheby's, and if we had won, then we would have governed where it's located, where it's displayed. We didn't win, so we didn't end up governing. So Constitution DAO never had a governance vote, but I don't think that makes it any less of a real DAO. Many DAOs kick off in a more centralized way and then start governance later on, and that was necessary in that case.
I think there's quite a bit of overlap in my proposed answer and the answers that were just given, but just very briefly, my goal is to structure, create a balance between structured oversight and community input. So we have at StarkNet, your standard public proposal system where token holders vote on different proposals. We also allow different committees to share their opinions. So stakeholders, so developers, auditors, so on and so forth, all have their say in the decision-making process. I think this is important if you want to have some type of adaptive, transformative, and actually interactive type of governance experience. But governance is a lot more than just voting on a proposal. It's discussing that proposal, creating delegate mechanisms, and creating, getting iterative feedback loops from all of those stakeholders as well. So yeah, I think the core concept here, just to conclude this, is governance. In order, we're starting off, but the goal is basically we need to think through governance not as a static entity, but something that evolves with the growth of the network, whether it's Arbitrum, which is extremely mature at this point, or StarkNet, which is newer, I guess, but less mature, and continue to allow it to evolve with the network's growth over time as well.
Yeah, I want to double down on that if you don't mind. I actually think when a lot of people think about governance, they just think about the votes, but it's a lot more than that. Like, the vote is just a final action that people actually take. The true essence of governance actually is in the discussions. It's in really pioneering certain progress, certain proposals, the back and forth between delegates, between different stakeholders. I actually think that that is something that is really indicative of how mature an ecosystem is. There are pros and cons, obviously, right? Like, you have a lot of different profiles of governance actors, right? You have governance advisories, you have, service providers, obviously you have like native projects. So just understanding all these different governance actors' incentives, what they're looking to propose, and what their counterparts are actually looking to, contribute to their proposal. I think that is actually the key to like a functioning governance system. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, talking about engagement, that's really important. And this kind of leads me to my next question. It's asking sort of what strategies different foundations take to incentivize this meaningful participation in becoming a real key player and stakeholder in the environment, and sort of avoiding that passive level of engagement where it is only voting and it's kind of limited to that.
Yeah, sure. I'll start this off. To start, I guess it is very, very difficult to get people to really care about governance. And it is such an important thing for the growth of the network, so you have to get it right. I think a lot of protocols do it in a similar manner, and they do it wrong. They think that if you put a ton of money on the table and tell people to manage it, that's governance. You might get a lot of engagement, and it might be quick engagement, but it's similar to an airdrop or a DeFi incentive program. There's a lot of noise in that, and it's hard to find the signal of people who actually give a crap about the future of your protocol. So what do we do here at StarkNet Foundation to incentivize people at StarkNet to care about StarkNet? Saying StarkNet a lot here. Basically, what we do is we take very deep technical discussions and we let the community manage it and design programs around it. It creates this filter of people who genuinely have to be engaged. And once we find that, we continue to follow up with those individuals. It's worked well. The last two major designs and initiatives, Stark Staking and Security Council, was actually co-designed by our community. And that was big. And you might be thinking, this stuff is easy to create. It's really not. There's hundreds and hundreds of potential design considerations for that, and none of these have actually been battle tested. So they will likely fail, and you'll have to stress test them and iterate on them continuing forward. So that's sort of what I like to think about. Find the people that actually care about the future of your protocol and empower them.
Yeah, and although that's sort of a more involved process than simply just facilitating DAO votes, it seems to really create a meaningful community beyond just that voting infrastructure. Thanks for sharing. Will?
Yeah, so I honestly think that you shouldn't incentivize participation. One example is Nouns, where Nouns doesn't have participation incentives. There are people who receive salaries from the DAO for various initiatives, but Nouns does not pay people for voting and has historically been quite resistant to that. What they get instead is a core of about 40 to 50 people who really, really love Nouns and are passionate about the community. And it's at the point where I ran into someone yesterday. He and I had seen each other from Nouns votes all the time. And he was like, wow, we've been working together for all these years, and now we're finally meeting in person. And that's the kind of atmosphere you get when people are just in it because they love it. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be paid by DAOs. They should be. But I don't think they should be incentivized for voting. They can be incentivized to contribute in other ways, and if they're an active contributor, they will vote. But I honestly think that the focus on governance participation as a goal is misguided. I'd rather have a DAO of 40 people who really care than 4,000 people who don't. Then you build the close ties and you build the community.
Very interesting. I think I'm somewhere in the middle between both your takes, right? Like, Arbitrum's governance, the start of the Arbitrum DAO was actually a really unique one. Just to bring you guys back on a history tour, right? Like, upon token generation, the foundation was formed, and then we had a huge base of delegates already, right? And they were looking to the foundation for direction, like, okay, now we're all delegates. What do we do next? So I think what the foundation did in Arbitrum's sense, it's really unique. We just said, you guys do what you guys want to do. Like, we're just gonna take on a neutral steward role. Whatever you guys vote on and gets approved, we'll just help to operationalize. So that has actually helped to seed a really, really broad base of engaged delegates. But that has its cons too, right? Like, we have had a lot of decentralization, but at the same time, right, like, the actors that are within the ecosystem might not be the best ones to make decisions on behalf of the DAO. right? So we have a huge treasury. How it's being spent has been not ideal. So I think, at least from the Arbitrum Foundation standpoint, we're going to be a lot more active in governance moving forward. We've always taken a backseat because we think that the DAO has actually established an identity for themselves, so much so that when we come in as as a participant, we're not going to be like a benevolent dictator of sorts, and the DAO will actually push back if we come up with like things that don't make sense, right? And then at the same time, right, like around actors being paid, we have a delegate incentive program where, you know, if you fulfill some criteria, then you get paid a certain amount. And that also includes like off-chain components. It's not just voting. So you have to actually be active on the forums. You have to comment your rationale on voting on proposals. You have to actually help with the refining of proposals. And then we have a team that assesses like what your level of contribution is and gets you paid. But that hasn't been ideal as well. But I agree that, you know, people actually do spend a lot of time and effort and resources in contributing to governance, and they should be compensated. But how they actually get compensated, how they're actually assessed, that's something that's not perfected yet, at least within Arbitrum.
I have a ton of respect for what Arbitrum has done on the governance side. It's probably, you guys in Optimism probably have the deepest governance skill sets. It is complex. It's large. There's a lot of stuff in it, and it just shows that you care a lot. I think there's an element of starting small and expanding out. And I think that, you know, you made some great comments, like some things haven't worked out. And I think it's great because you iterate, you change, you update over time. And I think that's kind of what governance is. There's no scientific answer here. It's just you'll mess up, and hopefully you won't mess up too badly, because then you'll fix it and make it better next time. And I think it's important, just as a foundation employee, that we kind of start with the structure and enable people, not incentivize people potentially, but enable like the real growth of the network and getting people to actually genuinely care about governance. Because if you don't get it right and it's too late, you're kind of screwed. But it's better to be too early than too late on this. Yeah,
I actually agree with that. I'm sorry if I'm cutting time short, but like, I think foundations need to be an active enabler of governance, right? So it's not necessarily like drafting proposals and getting people to post, but it's really encouraging people to have critical thinking in their proposals, thinking through implementation details, thinking through feasibility from a technical standpoint, from an economical standpoint, connecting them with other like-minded stakeholders, whether it's delegates, whether it's service providers and whatnot, and making the proposal as comprehensive as possible, because these people need, I think, guidance, and foundations have a ton of context. So as much as we're not actively putting up proposals, we can have a vast impact, and I think that it's essential to really empower these contributors to know that they are in a good position, they are confident to grow their reputation within the DAO.
That's awesome. And kind of foreshadowing one of my questions that you perfectly answered just now, it's that foundations are really acting as facilitators and enablers rather than driving all the conversation themselves and putting it, you know, on the foundation as that voice. It's really spreading it to the community. That's awesome. I wanted to rapid fire one quick question, last question here, just to wrap things up. So you definitely touched on this quite a bit, but what key factors, to kind of summarize in a couple key words, what key factors make a foundation really effective in shaping a network's long-term activity and directing it properly?
So I've seen a bunch of different examples in the space, and I think the best foundations are ones that are minimal. The foundations that give as much power to contributors as possible, or companies that are hired to develop for the foundation, those are the best ones. The foundation is less accountable than the DAO. As a result, it should be minimal compared to full-time contributors and also token voters.
In a few key words, just be there. Literally, that's most of the job of a foundation employee. People are really smart. You just need to be there, listen to their ideas, and help them push it forward.
Yeah. I'd say be an enabler. Like, don't think of yourself as a higher being. Always put yourself in the position of a new contributor and think about what will make them what will put them in the best position possible to succeed in your ecosystem long term.
That's excellent, guys. Thanks so much for joining me today. This was a really great panel, and I thank you for sharing all your expertise in the DAO space. And certainly we'll stick around if anyone has any questions, and more than happy to connect after the panel as well. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.